My civics, which was now 60 years in the past, I learned that I'm responsible to stay informed about issues that concern me and to vote for candidates I feel will do the best job of working for and implementing my interests. And if a majority of other voters agree with me, the chances are good that our representatives will do things I like. But even if my candidates lose, I could still hope that leadership might broker actions that were somewhat positive in the spirit of public good, maybe by working across the aisle or brokering compromise. Those are things we don't hear much about today. In America today, the political divides are dramatically more adversarial. The rhetoric is not used so much for discussion and comparison of ideas, but instead to other the opposition, diminish their humanity, and reject the value of any positions they might hold. Attacks are often personalized and wrapped in antagonism. Calling names and dismissing the validity of others is the red meat of negative advertising, along with raising levels of fear. The strategy to diminish the other, either directly or by disparaging their views. In politics, the other side was once called the loyal opposition. Today it tends to be the other, the wrong-minded, those who we know as they because they are not part of we. And in turn, to them, we are the outsider, or they're they. That was crystal clear, right? If you don't trust people, they become untrustworthy in your view. If you do not respect people, they become unworthy. If you do not value people, they start to become worthless in your mind. Distancing ourselves from the other breeds a contempt and allows us to see them as inferior or lesser or even as evil. It's not a huge stretch to believe that the election and inauguration of our new president will empower some persons to act out. These could be persons from radical right fringe groups or even just misanthropic loners. This emboldening might even be reinforced when many of those convicted of crimes for their January 20th offenses are pardoned and released from prison. This will bring a vindication to many of their politics and a sense of power and efficacy in the social order. And we must be keenly aware that our steady support for liberal causes is provocative to some of the people who disagree with us. Over the years, we've received multiple phone calls complaining about our stands for reproductive choice, LGBTQ+ rights, and Black Lives Matter. The only physical response we've received that I know of is the case where our rainbow flag decorations were removed and burned. Now, I actually invite this kind of criticism from the community. I think it's important that they tell us when something we say offends them. And usually we get to respond by saying, too bad. Doesn't offend me. We're on different pages. But there's room for discussion there. That's what I like. It's the possibility of opening a dialogue. So there is a possibility that we might face threats from others who are distressed by the positions that we take as a congregation. And we need to be aware of these threats, not because we expect them to become manifest, but because they might. We need to accept that we are exposed and vulnerable. And the bottom line is that we're pretty much defenseless in the event that someone decides to bring harm directly to our door. It is rare, but terrible things have occurred. In 2008, 15 years ago, a disaffected and angry man entered the Knoxville Unitarian Universalist Church with a shotgun. 2 persons were killed and 6 more were injured before he was subdued by members who resisted his attack. His motives were personal. They had to do with a failed marriage and other things, but they were also supported by a hatred he held for liberals and Unitarian Universalists. We all need to remember that if such a thing were to happen here, is just know that we're our own first responders. If we wait for someone to act on our behalf, it will probably be too late. Each of us should do whatever we can for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for the group. Any phone available should call 911. And then each person should either run away, if possible, hide, which seems unlikely in here, or resist. And that's not something we do. We're not an aggressive people. Resistance isn't something that jumps to our mind, but if we don't, no one will. Anyhow, I needed to say that at some point in time. Let's leave that behind us. My guess is the next flashpoint issue will arise when the federal authorities attempt to detain and deport undocumented immigrants. Tom Homan, the incoming border czar, says ICE deportation activity will start in Chicago right after President Trump is inaugurated on January 20th. The new administration wants to target sanctuary cities and states. To quote Homan, "We're going to start right here in Chicago, Illinois. If your Chicago mayor doesn't want to help, he can step aside. But if he impedes us, if he knowingly harbors and conceals an illegal alien, I will prosecute him." Big talk. This could bring some high visibility conflicts, and we could easily find ourselves involved. We are connected to a fair number of people whose status in this nation is somewhat insecure. And if we're publicly identified as supporting or practicing sanctuary for immigrants, we risk possible retribution from people who see that as threatening to the nation. Okay, but now I'm going to leave behind this whole notion of stranger danger and outside threats, because there's a far more important way we need to work to hold evil at bay and to keep hatred and negativity away from our congregation and our community. To do this, we need to protect ourselves from becoming a new part of the problem. We need to recognize the extent to which we tend to get sucked into the conflicts and into some of these we-they comparisons. It's often tempting to enter the fray and to express our disappointment in negative ways. We might malign our opponents, avoid persons holding the wrong politics, or insult those we disagree with. If nothing else, we're likely to sit around and make jokes about them. After all, we have our own strong feelings and sufficient confidence to know that we're right. We are liberal, we are woke, and often we can be quite arrogant about that. How did you feel in November when the results of the election became clear? I, for one, was gobsmacked. Simultaneously, I felt sad, disappointed, betrayed, embittered, dismayed, and there is no question that I wanted to be angry, to find someone to blame. Any time like this, when we start to have these feelings, is a great time for introspection. Yeah, I was upset and I was mad, but what good could that have done for me? I needed to step back, take a breath, and regain my own composure. In my mind, the American electorate had just made an egregious mistake. But they didn't do this just to rile me. I have to accept that whatever all of these voters see, they see it differently than I do. I know this because if they saw things the way I do, they would have voted differently. As you use, we actively practice relating to diversity in many forms: ethnic and racial, theological, cultural. And we know that our pluralism is best sustained by practicing tolerance and compassion, and through honest and open sharing about our beliefs and our differences. These are skills that should help us find our way through a time when our voices are not ascendant. We must resist any temptation towards anger and vindictiveness, as these can help lead us into narratives of conflict and hatred on our own. I'm not asking anyone to capitulate or give up. Our role as the loyal opposition continues, and it's more important than ever. We can still be the voice for justice, for reproductive rights, for acceptance and assimilation of immigrants, and for all historically marginalized peoples. But my advice for all of us is to do our best to work with the world we live in. We can no longer fight the 2024 election, and we will have to adjust to live through its consequences. Maybe by 2026 or 2028, more Americans will come over to the good side, not to show values. But until then, hold on to what is fundamental, your values and your opinions. Stay grounded in what you know, what you believe, what you have come to see as right. Our world is not a fair place. It's rife with injustices, unfairness, greed, selfishness, and occasionally outright evil. These are things we can try to fix over time, but also things we can hope to avoid. May nothing evil cross this door. These words are a hope, a prayer, an aspiration. And may we have the good fortune to avoid the terrible. Elias Ortega wrote, "We draw inspiration, comfort, and courage from the songs we sing when we gather in worship. When we join in song, we can be participants as well as listeners. Our songs can be prayers for one another that lift our spirits in times of need. Our songs provide a vocabulary of faith to express our longings, desires, and hopes." Hymn number 1 that we sang earlier, "May Nothing Evil Cross This Door," is a supplication to keep evil and hatred out of our church, out of our homes, out of our lives. But it is also prescriptive. It gives us a recipe to keep hate out by holding love in. Our best defenses against bad things are finding and feeding and sustaining what is good in our lives. If we engage and live with love as our guide, we can avoid the bile and bitterness that might fester from our anger and contempt. So let us go forth as ourselves, our best selves, eager to experience and grow, and grounded in the love we know for ourselves and for each other. Amen, Ashe, and blessed.